And for those who enjoy this channel and would love to support us financially, please feel free to hit that donate link. We'd greatly appreciate it. God bless.
Awesome. Well, it looks like we are finally live tonight. Guys, I promise you it's going to be well worth the wait. We're having some issues. Unfortunately, Dr. Dan experienced a mini thunderstorm, but we're here. We are good to go. We are here tonight for this, actually the second big debate this week. The feedback on the Dr. Kevin Anderson versus Jackson Wheat debate is great. And for those who have not yet seen it, please check it out at some point. Also, announcement-wise, tomorrow we will be having, it'll be over on Smoky Saints channel. It'll be Dr. James Tour. He'll be having an interview on the origin of life. So that should be one to remember. Please check that out. But tonight we have the highly anticipated debate between Dr. Kent Hovind and Dr. Dan Cardinale. There's been a lot of excitement for this one. I know I'm excited. Both men are no strangers to debates and no stranger to the topic of creation and evolution. So this is guaranteed to be a good one. For anybody who has not yet subscribed to this channel and love debates and discussions on these kinds of topics, please feel free to hit that subscribe button. Dr. Dan and Dr. Hovind were generous enough to give us their time for tonight's debate. We are debating, as you can see in the title, macroevolution versus microevolution. The structure for tonight's debate will be kind of a formal / semi-formal debate in that we are going to have timed rebuttals. Dr. Dan's going to start whatever time he takes, roughly 10 minutes. Dr. Hovind will take the same, followed by a rebuttal round of 6 minutes, and then a respectful open dialogue ending with a Q&A. Of course, in the dialogue portion, we like to keep it civil and respectful. Both debaters will feel that they are getting plenty of uninterrupted time to make their points and to respond to each other's objections and questions. So we're looking forward to this debate. Praise I Am That I Am is going to be gathering questions and super chats. We've got a big audience tonight, so just make sure you are tagging him so he doesn't miss it. Anyways, enough for me. Let's get right to it. Before we get started, though, I like to kind of break the ice and allow the debaters to give just a brief introduction as to who they are, what they may be doing over at their channels, or whatever they feel they want to say in terms of an intro before we get going here. So thank you, gentlemen. We can start with Dr. Dan. Thanks for being here. Oh, I think you might be.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah, scared me for a second. Just when we thought we were good.
So thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Kent, for being here. And thank you, everybody, for waiting. What happened is I got a thunderstorm about an hour before we were supposed to start, and I got an email that there was a lightning strike at like an exchange station in the next town over. So I didn't have power until about 10 minutes ago. So that's what happened there. But it looks like we're good to go. Hopefully I don't lose power at any point. If I vanish, that's probably what happened, but I don't anticipate that happening. So my name is Dr. Dan Stern Cardinale. I'm an evolutionary biologist and a biology professor. I teach general biology, the big intro bio class. So it's everything from cell bio and biochem through genetics and evolution and anatomy and physiology. It's a little bit of everything. And my PhD is in molecular genetics and microbiology. And if you just Google my name, Dan Stern Cardinale, and the word cytosine, you can find it online and read it if you really want to know how cytosine is important for how single-stranded DNA viruses evolve.
Okay, well, thanks for being here, and thanks again for giving us your time. We appreciate it. Dr. Hovind, brief introduction from yourself.
Well, thank you, sir. Good to be on the program again. My name's Kent Hovind. I taught high school science and math 15 years, and for the last 30 years, been traveling speaking on the topic of creation versus evolution. I take the position that the evolution theory is one of the most dangerous and dumbest religions in the history of the world. Never happened. God made everything in 6 days, just like he said he did. We believe the Bible is true. So it'll be an interesting discussion tonight.
Awesome. We're definitely looking forward to it. Thanks for that intro, Dr. Hovind. We're excited to have the both of you here. So enough from me. We broke the ice. Why don't we hand it over to Dr. Dan? I think he's got some slides to share. Yep. And whatever time you take, I've got about 10 minutes on the timer, but whatever you take, we'll give Dr. Hovind equal time. So go ahead.
Sounds great. Thank you. I'm just setting up my timer here. We'll just
no rush whenever you're ready.
Going. And here we go. Okay. So the question for this debate is whether macroevolution occurs. So the first thing that we need to address is what is macroevolution. Now, the real definition, the biology definition for macroevolution is evolution above the species level. So changes like speciation, the origination of new species, and changes of larger magnitudes. A really excellent evolutionary biology textbook by Zimmer and Emlin defines macroevolution as evolution occurring above the species level. That includes the origination, diversification, and extinction of species or long periods of evolutionary time. Now, there's also the made-up creationist definition, and it really should be definitions plural. Creationists generally define macroevolution as evolution between kinds. So this leads to the question, what is a kind? Now, it varies depending on who you ask, but it's generally taken to approximate the taxonomic rank of family. Now, Kent likes to say something silly like, has a pine tree ever given birth to a bear, or something like that. Now, do I need to point out why that's nonsense? I would hope not for the audience, but the reason that's nonsense is that nothing that's alive right now is descended from anything else that's alive right now. It's all about common ancestry and how far back in the past you have to go in order to find a common ancestor between any two things. And before Kent asks, do I think that we are related to pine trees and bananas? The answer is yes, and it's not something I think. We know that to be the case. So the question that I really want to explore in this opening is what would count as macroevolution? The creationist definition is famously squishy. It's hard in practice to draw a line and say, yes, if we observe this thing, that would count as macroevolution. So I want to go through some hypotheticals and some not hypotheticals and see what would count or not count as macroevolution. Now keep in mind, there's a saying, microevolution is evolution creationists can't deny. Macroevolution is evolution creationists must deny because it is in direct conflict with the creation model. Will Kent accept any of the examples I present as macroevolution? Of course not. But I want the audience to think of a common test that Kent uses, the 5-year-old test. Would a 5-year-old identify the things I'm talking about as two different kinds of organisms? Keep that in mind as we go through. So the first question is, would a new morphological feature, a brand new morphological feature, count as macroevolution? Depends, I guess. It didn't necessarily change the kind of organism, but for example, we know that feathers evolved from the scales of reptiles, and the transition involves nothing more than changes to the expression pattern of some regulatory genes. And we've known this for almost 2 decades now. The really cool thing is we can actually make this transition happen experimentally. We don't have to hypothesize what changes led to it. We can make it happen. So on the left here, you can see the scales of the legs of chickens be experimentally converted into feathers. And on the right, you can actually see the same thing happening in crocodiles, which is a species that has never had feathers anywhere in its evolutionary history. What about a completely new biochemical function? Because like I said, that was just a change in expression pattern. What about something completely new? Well, in HIV, there's a little protein called VPU, and it has an old function or an ancestral function, degrading a human protein called CD4. Well, it also has a new function in humans, antagonizing part of our immune system called tethering. This requires at least 4 specific amino acid substitutions, so at least 4 specific mutations, and you need all 4 of them. So for anyone watching, this is an irreducibly complex trait. But HIV only evolved from the SIVs around 1930 or so, give or take a decade. So we know that this irreducible trait evolved. It's a completely new biochemical function without the loss of the old function. I've heard Kent before define macroevolution as involving new information, so maybe this counts. I think not, because it's still a virus after all. But let's keep going. What about an amoeba becoming a brand new type of green algae? This is something we're watching happen right now in the present. There's a genus called Pollinella. It's a group of rhizarians, and they're heterotrophic, except for 2 species are photoautotrophs because they have this photosynthetic structure called a chromatophore. That chromatophore is derived from the cyanobacteria that the rest of the members of Pollinella eat. This is an event called primary endosymbiosis. And prior to the discovery of this species, this is an event that had only been known to happen twice in evolutionary history. But right now, we're witnessing a third instance of this event, an amoeboid rhizarian becoming a completely new kind of green algae by ingesting a completely new kind of cyanobacteria, or I should say a completely different kind of cyanobacteria from the one that resulted in the chloroplasts in things like grasses and trees. How about lizards giving birth? Would that count as a different kind of organism? This is something that we've actually seen a lot. Reptiles lay amniotic eggs typically, but there are over 150 instances of reptiles giving live birth, and there are several populations that are evolving this new trait in the present. In fact, there was a recent report of a lizard that laid 3 eggs and then gave
Dan, I just
live
wanted to
birth.
stop you real quick. I got some word from the live chat. I'm not sure. I think people are noticing your slides might not be moving. I don't know if it's just.
Oh no, what slide am I on in the video? Oh no. Hang on, let's see. Oh no, has it been stuck the whole time?
Apparently
no.
somebody just mentioned it in the live. Let me see. We don't see.
It looks like it's been stuck
people
the whole
just
time.
started noticing now.
Oh no. Okay, so here's what we're gonna do. I'm not gonna do the PowerPoint. I'll just scroll through it instead here. Hang on a second. Here's what we'll do instead.
We've got your timer paused too. Don't even worry. So
all right. So sorry everybody. Normally you can scroll through slides in StreamYard. I don't know what happened there. But I'll just scroll through it like this if that's okay.
Of course, yeah. If you want to just go through it slowly, as long as people can see, what you're talking about visually. So yeah, no problem.
Well, that's unfortunate. Sorry, everybody. So let's I'm going to go back through a few things just real fast so you see the visuals. And then that'll pick up where I was. So going back here, we've got feathers. So here is the right here is the feathers in the bird on the bottom left there, and then the scales converted to feathers in the crocodiles on the right. This is the HIV, new biochemical function, on the right, the ancestor one on the left in that figure. This is the new type of green algae that has evolved from the amoeboid rhizarian. This is, well, you can't see it because there's that headline in the way, but that's one of the many lizards that lays eggs. And where I left off right there is that not only does this involve changes to the way the eggs develop, but in a few species of these lizards, they actually develop a placenta. So we have a completely independent evolution of the placenta in a group of reptiles facilitating live birth. And what I was saying right when Standing let me know there was a problem there, was that we recently witnessed a lizard lay 3 eggs and then give live birth to the 4th member of that litter. So there are populations that are actually undergoing this change from egg laying to live birth right now. This is not some hypothetical thing. We're watching this evolution happen in real time. So how about some photosynthetic animals? Photosynthetic animals seem like something that would constitute a change in kind. If I asked a 5-year-old if that lizard that could do photosynthesis was different from a lizard that couldn't, I think the answer would be yes. So we see this not just in a few walking animals, we see this all over the place, in sponges, in cnidarians, in mollusks. And the cool thing here is that it's not just a matter of stealing the photosynthetic structures from your food, because you actually find the genes for photosynthesis in the animal genomes. And as you can see in these developing salamander embryos right here, it's actually passed vertically. So those already are green. They're expressing photosynthetic proteins and have photosynthetic structures, even though they're still developing in the egg. And one more example, what about multicellularity? A completely new instance of multicellularity. Now, this is directly observed in the lab. There's a species called Chlamydomonas that's usually unicellular. But if you introduce a predator into that population, they'll start to behave like colonies. And in at least one instance, we've evolved true multicellularity, because throughout their entire life cycle, there's no unicellular stage. And you can see that on the part D right here. Part A on the left represents their ancestral state. Part D on the right represents their derived multicellular state. That requires a whole bunch of new traits, not just a couple of new traits, but you need traits for cellular interactions. You need traits for a membrane, an extracellular membrane to hold all that stuff together. And they actually reproduce via multicellular structures called propagules. And that was a completely new thing for this type of previously unicellular green algae. So that's a whole lot of examples of things that, I think pretty reasonably we could call some of that stuff macroevolution. Now, is this all imagination? No, It's absolutely not imaginary. These are things that we have directly observed. There's no hypotheticals looking at fossils or anything here. So I don't want to hear anything about inferred evolutionary assumptions, none of that stuff. This is stuff we've directly observed. So let's turn it around. Let's look at Kent's model here, because in science, throwing stones isn't good enough. You need to have a better explanation. Does Kent's model do a better job explaining extant biodiversity? No, Kent can't even explain Kent's model in a consistent way, and we're going to see why that is. In general, the creation model accepts, or permits, I should say, common ancestry within families. I know there are people watching that are going to look at this and go, wait a minute, those aren't families. I know, but it's clear, so just go with me. So this red line right here, this red line on the right, might say that's where creationists draw the line and say on one side of that line, you can have common ancestry, but on the other side, not. Well, this is going to be based on their interpretation of the Bible. It's not based on actual evidence. You need a reason to draw a distinction there. But you can use the second red line or the third red line using the same standards. So the creationist standards for what does and does not count as a kind, or what can and cannot share common ancestry, ends up being inconsistent, arbitrary, and self-contradictory, as we're going to see as we chat tonight. So in summary, there you go. So in summary, creationists claim macroevolution can't occur. Now, that's just silly on its face because they're not even using the right definition of macroevolution. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what definition of macroevolution you want to use. By any reasonable standard, the changes that I've outlined, things like animals becoming photosynthetic, de novo multicellularity, lizards going from laying eggs to giving live birth via a placenta, by any standard, that stuff counts as macroevolution. And it's directly observed, no assumptions necessary. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for that opening there, Dr. Cardinale. And also, real quick, before we hand it over to Dr. Hovind Praise, some people in the chat.
I know. I'm working on it right now.
Just make sure you're not hijacking the screen. Okay. Well, I guess it was about 10 minutes, but I got a little bit thrown off there with pausing. But Dr. Hovind gets equal time for his opening, so I'm guessing between 10 and 11 minutes with the pause.
All right. My slides are not up.
Yeah, he's got to put them up.
Oh, Dan, I think you have to
Oh, here you go.
end the share screen, and we'll have the producer Praise. He'll make sure that he zooms in on Dr. Hovind's slide so everybody can see him. So go ahead whenever you're ready.
All right.
We're good.
The Bible says in the last days there would be scoffers who would walk after their own lust, and they would say, where's the promise of his coming? All things continue as they were. It's, in other words, things are happening now the way they've always been happening for a long time, millions of years maybe. For this they willingly are ignorant of, that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water, whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. So the scoffers are ignorant of how God created the world, and they're ignorant of that flood. Thirdly, it says they're ignorant of the coming judgment. Everything's reserved unto fire against the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men. So the scoffers are ignorant of the creation. They're ignorant of the flood that formed all the fossils and layers. No fossils are forming today anywhere in any significant numbers, maybe not even at all. It takes a rapid burial like the flood. There's no fossil record. There's a lot of fossils, and they formed in the flood. Anyway, let me skip up to slide 1056 here. Charles Darwin, at age 22, fresh out of school to be a preacher, set sail on HMS Beagle in 1831. He brought a book with him, freshly off the press by Charles Lyell, on principles of geology. That book changed his life forever. In his letter to Russell, Darwin said, disbelief crept over me at a very slow rate. So slow I felt no distress. See, Darwin later did dedicate his second edition to Charles Lyell for his book that he wrote. When Darwin sailed around the world, he came to the Galapagos Islands right there. And there he noticed on these different islands, there were 14 varieties of finches. He studied the finches, looked at them carefully, shot a lot of them. He hated birds because he loved worms. Charlie was a really strange man. So he shot all these birds and measured their beaks. The Grants went down there and spent 10 years from the mid-70s to the mid-80s doing, they didn't shoot the birds, but they captured them and measured their beak size. And they concluded during wet years, the beaks were thinner, and during dry years, the beaks were thicker. There are Rosemary Grant and Peter and Rosemary Grant did this. They discovered that they thought probably all the finches had a common ancestor, and I would agree. It was a finch. There are 228 species. divided into 50 genera and 3 subfamilies of finches in the world. I believe the common ancestor of all these finches was a bird. And Charlie wrote in his book, Origin of Species, it's a truly wonderful fact that all animals and all plants throughout all time and space should be related to each other. Wait a minute. You see 14 kinds of birds and you conclude that birds are related to tomatoes? And by the way, I never have said that we know that we know a pine tree gave birth to a bear. You do believe, though, Dan, that a bear and a pine tree have a common ancestor, don't you? Respond to that later. What Charlie observed is what we call microevolution, a variation within the same, what anybody would call the same kind of animal. Roses produce a variety of roses, dogs produce a variety of dogs. That is not evidence that dogs and roses have a common ancestor. This is a fact. The other part is a religion. You may get a big dog or a little dog, but there are limits to the variations. And a 4-year-old can tell you that a banana is not the same kind. Something's different about a banana between a wolf, coyote, and a dog. So a child can tell you that. The Bible said they would bring forth after their kind. I suspect the original definition of what a kind is can they bring forth? Now, they might have diversified now to where they can't, like a Great Dane and a Chihuahua would have a hard time. Or some of the variations, maybe the horse, I think the horse, zebra, quagga can all interbreed. So it seems to have to do with able to bring forth. So it's obvious it's a different kind. This word evolution is very slippery, has 6 different meanings, and we're debating 2 of them tonight. Cosmic evolution, origin of time, space, matter. There's no evidence for that. That's another debate. Chemical evolution, you guys have to get all the elements evolved from hydrogen. All 92 elements come from hydrogen. I'd like to see that. I want to make gold out of hydrogen. Then they have to have stellar and planetary evolution. Nobody's ever seen that. They've never seen a single star form. But there's a lot of stars out there. Everybody could own 11 trillion of them to yourself. Plenty of stars that we know of. Then you have to have organic evolution, the origin of life. And then what we're talking about tonight, macroevolution, changing from one kind to another. After that would be microevolution, variations within the kind. Now this one's been observed. Number 6 is purely science. Number 5 is imagination. The first 5 are actually religious. You have to believe in them. You may believe in them very strongly, but it is a belief in them. Let's see. I'm going to save a little time here. All right, here. This textbook says evolution can be defined as a change in species over time. Now, wait a minute. Are there any limits to these changes? They've been trying to get bigger dogs for a long time. You think they'll ever get a dog as big as Texas? They've been trying to get little lap dogs like Chihuahuas. You think they'll ever get one as small as a flea? There are animals as small as a flea, like a flea. I don't think they're going to get one that small. So I would say changes happen, but they are limits. In my video series, lies in the textbook, lie number 17 deals with this. The evolutionists will tell you, and I'm sure Dan believes, macroevolution is just microevolution over longer periods of time, and this is pure dreaming. This is imagination. Yes, it is. SpongeBob imagination. The central question of the Chicago conference was whether mechanisms underlying micro can be extrapolated to explain the phenomena of macroevolution. The answer can be given as a clear no. This is Roger Lewin, a long time ago. He figured it out 40 years ago. At Berkeley University, they said, what is macroevolution? Generally refers to evolution above the species level. I would be cautious of using the word species because a dog and a wolf are different species, but they can interbreed. The Bible says they'll bring forth after their kind. And we'll save time. I got a ton of stuff on this one. I just want to show you a few examples. Is macro just macro? Is macro just micro over more time? No, this is dreaming. No one has ever seen a dog produce a non-dog. You have to imagine that it happened long ago and far away. I guarantee 20 times tonight, Dan will refer to long periods of time, millions of years. That's how they hide the stupidity of their theory with lots of time. First of all, it's easy to prove the Earth cannot be billions of years old. But even with billions of years, it wouldn't help. We don't observe it. It's a religion. It's not a science. Nobody ever sees any animal produce a different kind of animal or any plant. There are genetic barriers to prevent it from happening. And if you did get a partly evolved dog, who would it marry? You got to get 2 of the opposite sex in the same place at the same time. They got to find each other and be interested. You got a whole host of problems there. Variations happen, but they have limits. Farmers have been trying to get bigger pigs for a long time. They'll never get a pig as big as Texas. Roaches become resistant to pesticides after a while, but they'll never become resistant to a sledgehammer. I'd bet $20 on that one. God created them to bring forth after their kind. There are varieties of tigers. They might have had a common ancestor called a tiger. They always produce the same kind of plant or animal. The information for the variation was already in the gene code. No new information is added. The dogs don't become pink or learn to fly. There's no new information added. The gene pool of the new variety is always more limited. And what we've done is develop dogs to the point where most of the crazy breeds they have wouldn't survive 10 minutes on their own in the woods. Chihuahuas wouldn't last 2 minutes. There are varieties of corn. I grew up in Illinois, corn country. I believe they had a common ancestor called corn. Real evolution would require an increase in genetic complexity, not a shift in gene frequency. There are hundreds of varieties of corn. That does not prove whales, tomatoes, and hamsters are related to corn. You can believe that if you want, Dan, and you can teach that as long as you're not using tax dollars to do it. Go start a private school and teach anything you want at a private school. But when you use tax dollars to make everybody pay for your religion to be taught, I think we have a right to object to that. The Bible says they will bring forth after their kind, after their kind, after their kind. There are many varieties of ear shapes or nose shapes in the world. They probably came from a common ancestor called an ear. There are dozens of varieties of eyes, eye colors, eye shapes, etc. They might have had a common ancestor called an eye. Different shaped foot shapes, different hand shapes, different lip shapes. A lot of different dogs in the world. Might have had a common ancestor called a dog. This article on BBC News said, looks like 95% of all the current dogs came from just 3 original founding females. I would agree. Here it says, dogs today come in all sizes and shapes, but scientists believe they evolved from a handful of wolves tamed by humans in China 15,000 years ago. Well, interesting. Divergent evolution. Textbook says, don't give it a fancy name. It's still a dog. This Irish textbook calls it divergent evolution. There are several varieties of squirrels in the world. We got a museum down here at Dinosaur Adventureland in Lenox, Alabama, with a variety of stuffed mounted taxidermied squirrels. They might have had a common ancestor called a squirrel. That's not proof squirrels are related to pine trees. God said they'll bring forth after their kind. The horse and the zebra and the burro might have had a common ancestor. I wouldn't argue about that. They got some itty bitty horses and some great big horses. They might have had a common ancestor called a horse. The Zorse, the Zonky, Zioni, Zedonk, Zebras, Shebras are all half-breeds between the different varieties, but they're all 4-legged animals with hooves and leather upholstery. This is not evolution. This is a variation of the same kind. I don't know if that's Photoshop or not, but it's pretty cool. Anyway, there's a herd of zebroids running around. Here's a picture of, I forget that thing, what that thing's called. I mentioned how the Kentucky Derby, they've spent billions of dollars trying to get faster horses, and in the last 100 years, they've only gone from 127 seconds to 123 seconds. And that is with trying to make it happen. Even in the old days, they had some really good times turned in, as good as today. If you really want to win the Kentucky Derby, breed wings on the horse and fly around the track. You win every time. There are varieties of lions and leopards. They can still produce offspring, so they must be the same kind. They make a taiga and a liger, probably the same kind. There are many varieties of cows. The beefalo and the buffalo probably had a common ancestor. There's lots of different kinds of sheep and goats. There's the whale and the walpin and the killer whale. There's 3 different varieties of camels, I believe. Might have had a common ancestor called a camel. Bible said they'll bring forth after their kind. There are 195 varieties of chickens in the world, and might have had a common ancestor called a chicken. Just what the Bible says. Let's see, how many? 225 owl species. Might have had a common ancestor, an owl. Variations happen, sometimes pretty bizarre.
You've got about 10 seconds, Dr. Hovind.
8 varieties of bears might have had a common ancestor. I can go on all day long. Dan, you will never be able to demonstrate a scientific evidence that a bear and a pine tree are related. You can believe it if you want, but that's your religion. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, well, thank you to the both of you for your openings. I appreciate the visuals. Good job. Yeah, we're jumping right into the timed rebuttal section. I've got 6 minutes on the clock, and we'll start whenever you're ready there, Dr. Dan. Oh,
there you go. Okay.
There we go.
Now we're good.
No problem.
All right. So thank you for all that. What do you say? Sorry. We're good. All right. Thank you for all that, Kent. So a few things I want to get out of the way real fast here is there was a bunch of stuff in there that wasn't relevant. So anything, I was writing as fast as I could, but things like scoffers and judgment, that's all irrelevant. Darwin on the beagle and Lyell and geology, The stuff about beaks, that's all irrelevant. Anything about non-biological evolution, none of that stuff matters for what we're talking about today. So, but the first point I actually want to address is, yes, pine trees and bears share a common ancestor. It was a unicellular eukaryotic heterotrophic organism. And we know that they share these things because they share lots of characteristics. For example, developmental genes. It wouldn't seem like plants and animals would share developmental genes, but Hox genes and some plant genes called Madsbox genes are actually very similar. Now, another thing, I'm not going to mention long time periods at long. I don't know if Ken wasn't paying attention to my intro, but I didn't mention any long time periods. I mentioned stuff that we're observing right now in the present. The Chicago conference that Kent mentioned, that was in 1980, and I mean, I've been in grad school relatively recently. I'm in the field of biology, and we've come a long way since 1980. We've learned a lot about how stuff works since then. So, like, you could pull a quote from 1980, but I don't think that's relevant for an evolution debate in 2020. Now, it's true that nobody has seen a dog turn pink and begin to fly, but we have seen salamanders turn green and start to do photosynthesis. And sorry, I got the age wrong. I thought it was 5 years. I guess it was 4-year-old. I don't know if a 4-year-old would consider a green photosynthesizing salamander a different kind. But that's really where the crux of this debate is going to wind up. What is a kind, and what is the limit of common ancestry within kinds? So let's find out. I'm going to share my screen here, if that's okay. So let's find out. I'm going to try to do this in a way that's not broken this time. So the first thing I want to establish is that I think that the standard for what a kind is common ancestry, is interbreeding. If they bring forth according to their kind, then if things can interbreed, then that implies that they are the same kind. And Kent, is that approximately right for you? Does that sound about right?
Am I muted?
No.
I would say if they could originally interbreed, yes. We may have varied now to the point where that's not possible. That's what I said a while ago.
So we can get varied. So already it's okay. So already it's getting a little bit squishy. So I want to see if we could find a line in the sand here. So I'm going to try to full screen this, and I hope it works. And if it doesn't, just let me know. But I'm going to go to the next slide. And if it doesn't work, let me know. Okay. Can everyone see slide F? Yes.
Yes. No? Yep. It looks good. We can
All
see
right.
it.
Okay. So here's Kent. I need a little audience participation here. Can lions and tigers evolve from a common ancestor? Does that seem they're the same kind?
I believe so. I showed that, how we got a lion and a tiger.
Great. Yeah. Okay. So why specifically, what makes them the same kind? What is it about lions and tigers that we could say, yep, they're the same kind?
I think there are thousands of similarities between those creatures. They have hair on the outside rather than on the inside. They both have claws. They have canine teeth. I mean, we can go on all day about the anatomy.
Sure.
Digestive tract, similarities, sure.
How about lions and cheetahs? They the same kind?
Yeah.
Real quick, the chat's saying they cannot see slide F. Maybe you have to click on it.
Okay. We'll just do it this way. Can everyone see slide F now?
Yeah.
All right. So lions and cheetahs. Oh, you don't have there's no suspense this way. But all right, lions and cheetahs. Lions and cheetahs, are they the same kind?
Possibly so. That would be a good field of research for people to get in.
That would be a good field of research.
That would prove lions and tomatoes are related.
How about lions and bobcats or saber-toothed tigers?
Yeah, I showed slides of that. I'm not sure how far it goes, the variation within the kind.
But it's based generally on the ability to interbreed.
Would you agree they're all in the cat kind?
Oh, sure. But if we want to talk about the cat kind, then that's going to cause some issues because let me change gears a little bit here, because so far I've heard a lot about how evolution is wrong, but I haven't heard any support for the creation model. So if I can just let me just pop back up to here. Now, the thing that needs to happen in order for creationism to be right is you need to have lots of speciation very rapidly after the arc. In fact, you need to have faster speciation and diversification in the creation model than you do in the evolution model.
You've got just over a minute, Dan.
Thank you. So, for example, in the approximately 300 years from the flood to Abraham, you need to get over 150 species of cats, all the extant cats, plus all the extinct cats. And that's not just a problem for cats. These are examples of Egyptian hieroglyphics right here that date from the Middle Kingdom. So you've got things like elephants, giraffes, you've got baboons and monkeys, you've got different things, you've got hares, you've got all kinds of different birds, you've got vultures, you've got falcons, you've got owls, you've got, I don't even remember what they are. There's storks, there's flamingos, there's sparrow and swallow. You have extant biodiversity within a few hundred years after the flood, and the creation model has no way to account for that. On the other side of things, I've given you examples of observed massive evolutionary changes, and if anyone wants, I can describe the mechanism for every single one of them.
Awesome. Just on time with 3 seconds to spare. So I appreciate that, Dr. Dan. I'm going to reset the clock, 6 minutes. Dr. Hovind, whenever you're ready, I'll start the timer.
Well, yeah, he mentioned things we're observing right now as evolution, but what he gave is simply variation within the same kind. Nothing's changing into a new kind. Some reptiles lay eggs, some lay eggs, and some hatch the eggs internally, and the baby comes out alive. There's ovoviviparous and viviparous. I'm sure you're aware of that, studying biology. So I don't know that there's anything new has happened. They're certainly not developing the ability to split in half or develop without a male fertilizing the egg. I mean, so what you've given us are examples of variations within. They're still the same kind. Still a lizard. That's not evolution. Somehow you need to get your lizard to come from a rock over billions of years, or come from an amoeba. I'll let you start off with a living form like an amoeba. To go from single cell to multi-cell. You don't have any examples of that. It doesn't happen. We don't see it happening today. No single-celled animal is producing anything other than single-celled offspring. That's all that happens. God said they bring forth after their kind. There are 1,000 varieties of bananas. Many of them are developed by man for some particular purpose, like for their weather or their soil or for their market who's buying them. Some people like a certain type of Cavendish banana better than another one. So, but they're still a banana. That's what I can't get you guys to see. You guys make up these phylogenetic trees showing that all things are related. They have animals, fungi, and plants all related to bacteria. Well, just because you can draw lines on paper doesn't make it true. Here they've drawn lines between an elephant and a mammoth, a woolly mammoth, and it's probably true that the mammoth and the elephant could have had a common ancestor. They're similar enough. But see, the big thing you're missing, Dan, I'm not asking for my belief to be taught at taxpayer expense. You are. The burden of proof's on you, not me, to prove my point. There are 1,100 varieties of bats that have been identified, but that does not prove bats are related to pine trees, even if you go back billions of years. There are lots of leopards in the world. They might suspect they're the biblical same kind. Maybe I don't know how many cats Noah had on the ark, but to go from a couple of pairs of cats to the hundreds of varieties today is a minor problem compared to going from a rock to a cat or from an amoeba to a cat, which is what you believe. They can crossbreed the lion and tiger and get a liger. Here's the hybrid chart right here. They get tigons, ligers, liards, leoponds. Many of these cats can be crossbred. I would be willing to bet $20 you couldn't crossbreed a cat in a pine tree, even in your laboratory. There are hundreds of varieties of oak trees that might have had a common ancestor. Well, here's what happens. They draw these circles for the kids to learn in their textbook with all the animals going back to a common ancestor. Outside that circle is science. Inside that circle is religion. You believe that this one shows, for instance, a mammoth and a bat and a horse and a cat and a dog and all these and a whale all having a common ancestor. This is nonsense. This is SpongeBob imagination. This is all it is. So what happened? Two things happened in the early mid-1700s and mid-1800s. They started teaching the earth is billions of years old, and these variations can go on forever. Hutton's book started this. He made people doubt the earth age, which is clearly less than billions of years old. And then Lyell made people doubt the flood, just like I said, the scoffers in the last days. And Darwin made people doubt the creator, which you're welcome to do. I don't care if you believe in the creator or not. I do care that y'all want to use force everybody to pay for your religion to be taught. We have a clear violation of separation of church and state with teaching evolution in the textbooks. Let's see. I got a ton of material on that. So Darwin did not observe any evolution. He observed variations within the same kind. They were a bird. And they still are a bird, by the way. The Grants went down there and found out they are still birds, still finches. So you wanted me to define species or define kind. I would defy you to give a clear definition, a bulletproof, airtight definition of species. Is a dog and a wolf a different species? And can they interbreed? Where exactly is the line? Give me a solid, rock solid definition of species. The burden of proof is not on me to define kind. Like I said, we're not asking mine to be taught. But I think, as I said, I believe a kind is probably those that originally could bring forth. And a lion and a tiger and a jaguar are probably the same kind of animal. And I think a 3-year-old will tell you the oak tree should not be in that same kind. And neither should the worm, and neither should the mosquito. So for you to see the variations that happen within an obvious similar kind of creature or plant or animal, and therefore conclude that that means everything is related. This is where I cannot get you guys to see how silly your religion is. You see the obvious variations within the kind, like a lizard producing an egg that hatches inside the body before it comes out, which is probably what happens in that case. I'd have
1 minute, Dr. Hovind, 1 minute.
Placenta. I'd like to see some evidence of that. But even if it's true, could that be that they lost something over the years? All you have are examples of losing, no gaining. Where's the new information where's it coming from? Useful information in the gene code would be, look how much trouble we had getting the computers going and the cameras going for this debate tonight. This is primitive compared to one cell in a body. And one little thing can go wrong and it shuts everything down. One little mutation shuts everything down. Doesn't create anything new. So I defy you to show me any new information being added that's going to take over the population. Go ahead.
Okay, well, great openings and rebuttals from the both of you. We're going to go right now into a 20-minute dialogue. I want to make sure it's evenly timed with one topic at a time being discussed, of course. Let's make it a free-flowing dialogue, and if I have to step in, I will. I don't think I will have to. You're both respectful. So, Dan, since Kent just ended, you can start it off with a question or some points, however you'd like to proceed, and we'll kind of go from there.
All right. So first, I just want to address a couple very small things. The lizards with the live births, some of them they basically have shellless eggs, but several species do have actual placentas. That's not up for debate. They actually have evolved placentas separately from mammals. It's a brand new placenta, and that requires a bunch of new genes and protein-protein interactions. And again, this is something we're watching happen in real time. So it's not like that's you can't really deny what you can watch happen. But I do need to point out here, we've now moved the goalpost a little bit, because this started off talking about macroevolution as evolution between kinds, right? What got off the ark and could interbreed. But now we've moved it to, well, it goes from amoeba to algae, but like it didn't come from a rock. Well, like that's a different question than the question of how far back does common ancestry go within or between kinds. Okay, so I just need to point that out first. The other small thing I want to mention is I think species concepts are dumb and counterproductive, and we don't need them in biology because they're artificial constructs. They're just, our silly human brains like to put things in boxes where they don't necessarily fit. But the creation model does require like discrete groups. And the inability to figure out where those groups are, because you could just go back and back and back phylogenetically, and you end up having to draw a line arbitrarily somewhere. That's a problem for the creation model that doesn't exist for the evolution model. Because species concepts don't work well. Great. I don't care. I don't like species concepts. But the creation model, there needs to be a line that says you can't evolve past this point. Well, where is that line? What specific thing cannot happen? And I have to laugh a little bit because Kent said, well, you can't get multicellularity. Well, I gave you an experimental example of multicellularity. You can't get new information. I never know what creationists mean by new information, but I gave you an example of a completely new biochemical function in a specific gene that, bonus points, was irreducible. So like, I don't know where the line is. So I would love to end this by asking what specifically cannot happen? What magnitude of change? What type of characteristic cannot evolve? And what specifically is the mechanism that prohibits it? That's where I want to leave that.
Okay, thank you for those points there, Dr. Dan. That was about 2 minutes. Dr. Hovind, take equal time to respond to whatever you feel is necessary. Go ahead.
Well, thank you. That's a great question. Where is the line, and where is the line for speciation? What we've observed, I think this is what most of our sporting goods or sporting events are about. what's the limit on human ability to lift weights? Can a man lift 300 pounds? Can a man lift 400 pounds? Because somebody's always trying to break the record. Do you think, Dan, it'll ever be possible for a man to lift 2 billion pounds or 10 trillion pounds? Is there a limit? Sure, there's a limit, obviously. Have they reached it? I don't know, probably getting close. Is there a limit to how big dogs can get? Will they ever get a dog? They've got big ones now, Great Danes. Will they ever get a dog as big as an elephant? I don't know exactly where the limit is, but I think they're probably getting close. But again, the burden of proof's not on me. You guys believe the elephant and the dog all came from a single-celled creature like an amoeba. We don't ever see single-celled creatures produce anything other than single-celled babies. Never observed, none. So is there a limit? I don't know, and I don't care. I think people are always pushing the limit. Can we get a smaller dog and get the little, teacup chihuahuas or whatever? They wouldn't survive in nature. Nature would never select such a thing. The limits, the variations that happen within the natural world, dependent upon climate or water supply and things like that, or predation or speed to be able to run from predators, that automatically limits. Nature does select certain body types to survive in certain environments. The greyhounds wouldn't survive in Alaska for 2 winters. Now the wolves do, and the thick-furred dogs do, but those same wolves and thick-furred dogs wouldn't survive 2 summers in the Sahara Desert, where the dingo and the greyhound can survive. But they're still a dog. So the hair, the density of the hair, the length of the legs, the density of the body, surface area to volume ratio varies, and nature selects certain ones to happen. Either nature is selecting it or man is selecting it. Most of the varieties of corn have come about because somebody's crossbreeding them to get what they want. This is all farmers do that. Down here in the South, they've developed a special pine tree that grows super fast, because they raise a lot of pines, because the soil's good for raising pine. Well, it's still a pine tree. So can I define the limit in every case? No, but I think I can show you. They might get a dog as big as a Great Dane. Maybe they get one a little bigger, but they will never get one as big as an elephant. I certainly won't get one as big as Texas. How's that? They'll never get a dog as big as Texas. So
go ahead, Dan.
I mean, we've now heard twice that you can't get multicellularity things from unicellularity things, but if I could just share a paper real quick right here. Let me just show you this real fast. Let's see. It is this one. Here you go. If we could put that up on screen. De Novo Origins of Multicellularity in Response to Predation. This is the figure where I got that figure right here. I mean, this is a laboratory experiment where we directly observed a unicellular organism becoming an obligate multicellular organism. And this involved a number of unique new traits. This group of organisms, it's a type of green algae called Chlamydomonas, never had this thing called an extracellular matrix. An extracellular matrix isn't even something that all multicellularity things have. Animals have it, but other multicellular cellular things don't. This is a completely new example of an extracellular matrix. Reproduction via multicellular structures called propagules. That evolved completely new in this species. These new traits involve new genes. You have to have novel genetic information in order to get this new stuff. And we could go top to bottom looking at things like that. Let me end this screen share here. I have another example here of a plasmid. Kent, do you know what a plasmid is? Everyone in the audience know what a plasmid is? Are you familiar with that term?
It's been years ago that I studied that. I don't remember the details now, but anyway.
I think it's this one right here.
One topic at a time, though, Dan. Could you go back to your slide of your algae and tell me, is this a colony of algae working together, or is this actually one single organism?
It is one single organism, and we know that that's the case because not every individual in the group evolves. This is the plasmid one. This is the next one I want to talk about. We know that it's a true organism because in a colony, what you need to have is basically there's kind of competition within the colony because each thing could live on its own, and if you don't reproduce, you kind of lose out. But in multicellular, you have an agreement between all the cells in the organism that, like, look, we're all genetically identical, so you over there, the germline, you're going to reproduce, and that's okay with me, the skin cells, because you have all the same genes anyway. And in this example with Chlamydomonas, they reproduce as multicellular units, but not every cell in that group reproduces. So they have specific cells that are responsible for reproduction. It's not just a colony, it is true multicellularity.
Okay, now Dan, is this happening, is somebody causing this to happen in a laboratory, getting them to get together, or is this they're discovering it in nature? How do they know it wasn't always this way?
We know it wasn't always this way because we found, I want to say dozens, but don't quote me on the number. I'm not an algae person, but I want to say we have dozens of species of like Chlamydomonas and the related algae, and none of them have these traits. And you can look in their genomes and see, like, compare their genomes to the things like the colonial green algae or the true multicellular green algae and the land plants. And there's a bunch of genes that they're missing that are involved in multicellularity. But here we have the de novo evolution of true multicellularity from members of that lineage that have never experienced it before. So we could be very certain that this is not just recovering an ancestral trait. That's definitely not the case. They're evolving new information that's leading to a new phenotype, multicellularity, and the associated biochemical changes that are required for that to happen.
Okay. And you can demonstrate that this was not ever the case before. How would you demonstrate such a thing? Maybe this is something they've always been able to do for thousands of years.
No, you can look in the genome because we're pretty good at looking at, for example, colonial green algae like Volvox or Spirogyra or Edagonium, and we can see what genes are involved in things like cell adhesion, and we can see that those genes are just missing from Chlamydomonas. They don't have the pathways that other colonial or multicellular algae use. So the fact that they're evolving multicellularity in the lab indicates that they're evolving the new machinery in order to have to be able to do that. And again, there's nothing about millions of years required for any of this. This is all you do is take some pond water, put it in the lab. Obviously, I'm oversimplifying. You introduce a predator that eats them, but it's not like something new. It's their natural predator. And that it imposes a selective pressure for things that start off clumping together. But you're vulnerable if you have a unicellular stage in your life cycle. So over time, they evolve to be multicellular throughout the entire life cycle. And you could go through top to bottom, all the examples I gave you, the photosynthetic animals, the rhizarian, the amoeba turning into the green algae. I give you chapter and verse for every one of those examples. There's no assumptions. There's no, evolutionary timelines needed. This is all stuff that we're directly observing.
Well, I'd like to point out for the record, Your Honor, you did mention over time. So you do several times have mentioned the time being a big issue. You saw these little changes, and then over time, it could do bigger changes. This is why you believe that. But you do rely on long periods of time, even though you said you didn't mention that. So are you convinced, then, that this process you've seen of these algae cells working together, becoming a new organism, even if that's true, that process is sufficient to change algae to a whale over enough time? Do you really believe that?
No, that's kind of ridiculous because algae and whales aren't on the same lineage. So you gain traits that are adaptive to be photosynthetic, and then you also gain traits that are adaptive to be a heterotrophic multicellular marine mammal. And those things are different. So you're never going to see an algae change into a whale. But the point that I started with is that what we're talking about here is common ancestry. And this goes back to the main question that I have for the creation model, which is, where do you draw the line? I'm saying, yeah, you can go back from a whale and an algae and you're going to find a common ancestor. And we can find evidence of that in their genomes without breaking a sweat. Now, what you are saying is, well, you can take the whale and the other whales and they share common ancestry. And maybe you could throw like hippos in there, right? I don't know if you accept that hippos and whales share common ancestry.
I do not.
And with the green algae, you could throw them together maybe with the plants, but like eventually you hit a wall where you can't go back further. But what I'm saying is the changes that are leading to those large magnitude evolutionary changes, those large gains of function, those new traits, those things are observable in human timescales. I mean, I think the longest time period that I gave you in my opening was HIV, which first appeared in humans around 1930. So, I mean, we're not talking long periods of time here. That's an irreducible, that HIV example is an irreducible novel biochemical trait that we know appeared in the last century, like, because HIV didn't exist before then. So it had to be new in that time frame. So, I mean, the point is, we're observing all of these large-scale changes directly right now. We're not using fossils. We're not assuming millions of years. So you're saying changes of some magnitude can't happen. I'm saying based on what we can observe in the present, tell me where that line is. Draw me a specific line and tell me how far back you have to go before you find something that cannot happen.
Well, as I mentioned, the burden of proof is not on me to do that. You want, put my slide up there, would you, Steve?
Yep.
Okay. The textbooks do teach the kids that algae and whale have a common ancestor. And you, I think, just confessed that you believe such a thing. And that, again, is you're welcome to believe anything you'd like, but that's not science. This one shows very clearly that all the animals and all the plants have a common ancestor. Kids are taught this stuff every day in all of our school system, and this is not science. This one shows all the bacteria being related to all the animals. So the whale and the bacteria do have a common ancestor if you go back far enough. Seeing the variations, the little variations happen within the same kind, and studying the gene code. Well, the gene code is mind-boggling in its complexity by itself. This is like studying the sequence of letters in a book that somebody writes and find out how many times did they use the letter A or the letter B, and what's the sequence of letters they used, and therefore concluding that nobody wrote the book. The code that you're talking about, the genetic code, is complex beyond our imagination. For you to believe, capital B, believe, that the code itself formed by chance, from non-living material, ultimately. If you want to move the goalpost back, you guys have to believe that. You certainly teach that to all the kids in school, that we came from non-living material, and that all came from a dot of nothing exploding, which is why I went through the 6 meanings of the word evolution. So I'll give you the microevolution, and I would like to see you show how that somehow adds up to proving that like this chart shows here, all the animals, which would include the whales, are related to the plants. So the whales and the pine tree have a common ancestor in your religion, and I support your right to believe that. I resent paying to have it taught. That's not science. That's your belief. If you go back, you've seen some algae cells get together and colonize. I have to study some more on that and find out exactly what's happening. Has it always happened? We just now discovered it as one option. Or are they actually developing new gene? Are they losing genetic information? If one cell is no longer able to reproduce, it's now a skin cell. Well, then it lost something. So how do you account for gaining new genetic material, genetic information? If you had a lot of lightning strikes on your computer, would it ever turn PowerPoint into Microsoft Word? No, it's not going to happen. So I'm baffled, A, that you can believe pine trees and whales are related, and you do. And I'm baffled that you want me to pay to have that taught to all the kids. That's not common sense. That's your religion. Keep it. Go ahead.
All right. Well, so one quick thing, and while I'm saying this, I'm just gonna stop my screen here, and I'm gonna change my screen share. So one quick thing right here, just a second. Sorry, I'm looking for that. Okay, here we go. Okay. So first thing is that, okay, I'm glad you did the goalpost move and then immediately threw the flag on yourself. So that saves me the trouble of doing it. So thank you for that. But I feel like we're talking past each other because you keep talking about little changes and extrapolating from little changes. But I'm not showing you little changes and saying, well, you can tweak the fur color and therefore you can change the body plan, right? I'm not saying that. I'm showing you the big changes straight up. I'm showing you animals becoming photosynthetic, multicellularity appearing in a laboratory experiment, completely new biochemical functions. So we're not taking the little changes and extrapolating. I'm showing you the big changes. But if I could share that screen that I just added right here, if we could pull that up, we do have an answer for where does new genetic information come from, and it does cause a problem for a claim you made earlier regarding kinds. So there's lots of mechanisms of getting new genetic information. So you can have a gene duplication, followed by a process called neo-functionalization, which is where one of the duplicated copies starts doing a new thing. That's how we got the photoreceptors in our eyes. Those were chemical receptors, but there's lots of them via duplication, and then some subset of them are responsive to photons instead of chemical signals, and that's how we can detect light. It's really cool. That's a very common mechanism. But what I want to talk about here is something called de novo gene synthesis. Now, this is a phrase, some people may have heard this phrase, orphan genes, genes that are restricted to a specific group and usually to a species. Now, we now know how orphan genes came about. It took us a little while. This for a long time was an unanswered question. But we now know that they're from things like long non-coding RNAs. And the evidence for this is that you can have random sequences of RNA or polypeptides, and they have biochemical activity. And if you have these random sequences in cells, this is the second reference right here, if you have those in cells, turns out they're well tolerated. They tend to not cause that many problems, surprisingly, actually. Well, what we can look at in these de novo genes, these taxonomically restricted genes, is we can look for long non-coding RNAs in related species, so in the same clade, right? So we can look at the human genome and find orphan genes, and then we can look at other apes and see, okay, do they have long non-coding RNAs that match that? And the answer is yes. We can do this for everything. We do this for yeast, rice, humans. It's not hard to find these genes. Now, this is a problem for the creation model because Kent earlier specifically said that you don't get new information. He said you don't have a mechanism for getting new information, and in fact, you lose information as within a kind, the species diverge from each other. Well, here, these orphan genes tend to be restricted to the species level, sometimes the genus, but generally they're species specific. That's why they're called orphan genes, because they don't have any relative genes in the related species. Well, according to the creation model, if you can't get new stuff, then that means every species that has an orphan gene has to be its own created kind. Otherwise, you're permitting the evolution of new genetic information within those species. So that's the answer to where new genetic information comes from. It's longer than that, but that's a couple of the mechanisms. And also it creates a problem for the creation model.
I don't think it creates a problem at all. I'd like you to tell me, you've given an example that you think they added new genetic information. Are there mutations that happen where genetic information is lost?
Oh, sure, all the time. Yeah, absolutely.
Is that more common than gaining?
I'm hesitant to say yes because I need a definition of information. So we need to be able to quantify it to answer that question.
I'll say yes. I'll say yes for you.
Probably it depends on how you define information. I think the answer is yes, but without how are we defining the quantity of information?
Well, I think any biologist would tell you that most of the mutations that we see are detrimental or harmful or fatal.
Most of them are neutral.
Well, if you get 1 out of 10,000 that is beneficial, which let's just pick that number, do you really think that's going to drive a single-celled organism to become a whale over millions or billions of years?
I mean, well, we flipped the question there. First, it was almost everything is harmful, but that's not true. Almost everything is neutral. So now it becomes, well, the beneficials are too rare. I would say that beneficial is context specific, right? So what works in one environment doesn't necessarily work in a different environment. So I would say calling a mutation inherently beneficial or inherently harmful is improper biologically because the context matters, right? The context matters. A mutation that makes your skin lighter is really useful in Siberia, but it's really bad in the tropics. A mutation that makes your skin darker is going to cause problems in Siberia, but it's going to be useful in the tropics, right? So is that good? That's just changing the pigment levels in skin. I don't think either one of those is a gain or a loss. You're just modulating the levels at which things are made. But the benefit or cost of them is context specific. So what we do see over time is increasing complexity. That's not hard. The question is, are those changes beneficial? And what creationists often claim is, well, maybe you could get a new thing, maybe you could get a new trait, but that's actually a loss or it's harmful or whatever. Well, one, if you're going to claim it's a loss of information, you have to be able to quantify that information and describe that loss biochemically. And two, if you're going to claim that it's harmful, you have to be specific about the context in which we're talking. If I was to grow flippers, that would be really harmful, but I would do better swimming in the ocean. Right? And if I happen to live on the coast and competing for food along the coastline was hard, and I could go into the ocean more effectively and get food, then maybe being a bit of an awkward walker would actually be pretty beneficial. Now, does that counter a gain or a loss? I don't know, but it's a diversification and it gets you more biodiversity in the environment.
Well, gain or loss, either way, I think it's counted as imagination. We don't observe that. We don't observe any animal gaining new traits like that, gaining flippers or gaining ability to hold their breath for 3 days. We don't see that happening. You can believe it if you'd like. And you do believe that a whale and a pine tree have a common ancestor. You said so. So to get from whatever that common ancestor was, you're saying that the mechanism you've seen of it being a beneficial mutation in some environment is going to slowly drive a single-celled organism like an amoeba to become a pine tree and a whale. They both branches on that tree go back to the common root, and that is your belief. Is that fairly stated?
Real quick before you answer that, Dr. It's been a really good, engaging dialogue. Just because we got a lot of super chats and a few questions to get through, why don't we let Dr. Dan respond to that, take as much time as you need and kind of wrap up your points, and then we'll do the same for Dr. Hovind. You kind of wrap up your points. If you feel like there's something you want to address that you haven't, do so now, kind of like a concluding statement, and then we'll jump into some questions.
Yeah, sounds good. Let me just pull up a little conclusion slide here, but I do want to address before we go to the slide.
Yeah.
I do just want to address a couple small things that Ken said there. So, like, do we see people evolving the ability to hold their breath for 3 days? Well, not 3 days, but like that's actually an example of a well-described beneficial mutation in humans. And there are a couple traits of this that have to do with blood oxygen saturation. So there's one trait that's found in Tibetan populations. It's 2 alleles that are enriched in Tibetan populations relative to the Han Chinese populations that facilitate greater oxygenation of the blood at high altitude. And then I forget the specific location of it, but it's somewhere in the Pacific. I forget. I apologize to the audience. I forget where it is, but there's it's not the exact same gene. It's a similar mechanism though that increases blood oxygen saturation among Pacific Islander populations. Again, I apologize. I don't remember specifically where this is located, but it's well studied. And there's populations of humans that have the ability to hold their breath for like unthinkable amounts of time. And the cool thing is, this is convergent evolution, where it's actually similar to how marine mammals like whales and walruses and that kind of stuff, how they're able to hold their breath. It's like, so I mean, you brought up that example. It's kind of like a silly, oh, this could never happen, but like we actually do observe that kind of thing in humans. So just to conclude, as I expected, nothing I said, all those direct observations, none of that stuff counted as macroevolution. But you know what? That is okay. Because Kent, we agree. You said before, of all those 6 types of evolution, microevolution we agree on. And if none of the stuff I said counts as macroevolution, if all that stuff is just microevolution, it's all just changes within kinds, then the last question I have is, what can't microevolution do? We see photosynthetic animals, we see multicellularity, we see a brand new type of green algae, new biochemistry. So if all that stuff is just microevolution, do we need macroevolution to explain extant biodiversity? I think the answer might be no. I think microevolution can do all of it according to what we've talked about tonight. So my point here is that you can debate the meaning of words. You can debate whether an observed thing counts as microevolution or macroevolution. But what you cannot debate is stuff you can observe with your own 2 eyes and watch it happen in front of you. And I'll leave it to the audience to decide, do the things that we've observed that I've described tonight, do those things count as macroevolution? Are those new kinds? It's up to you. I think they are. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for wrapping up your points there for the dialogue, and thanks for the concluding statement, Dr. Dan. It's been very good, engaging discussion. So, Dr. Hovind, if you want to kind of wrap up the dialogue and then give a brief concluding statement, take as much time as you need.
All right. I think all he has given all evening is examples of what people call microevolution. I kind of object to that term. That gives the evolution the free rider effect. Like it should just be called a variation. That's all we've seen. Variations within the lizard kind. Some can produce eggs that hatch inside the mother. Some can produce eggs that hatch outside the mother. You're still a lizard. Some green algae work together as a colony, or maybe even more than a colony, where some lose a particular function. You're still a green algae. All he's given is variations of what anybody would call the same kind of life form. It's still an algae. It's still green. God said they would bring forth after their kind. That's all we've ever observed in all of recorded history. You may get a big dog or a little dog, but you're going to get a dog. You can guarantee that. And the farmers might try to capitalize on these little changes. They do all the time. They try to develop certain plants or animals that are best for their particular environment or their oxygen levels. If they're high altitude, they want sheep that can do blood oxygen absorption better. Because they're high altitude, like the people in Tibet, like you mentioned, but they're still sheep, or they're still people. If you wish to believe that sheep and people have a common ancestor, which I'm sure you believe, you're welcome. But it's not science. So the purpose of the debate was to ask the question: can microevolution lead to macroevolution? And I think I clearly won by showing we've never seen it happen. No, it can't. You can believe it if you like, and I'm sure you do, but it is a religion, as I've said all along. Microevolution is a lousy term. We probably shouldn't even use that term. It's a variation within what anybody with half a brain cell would say is the same kind of life form. We never see pine trees produce other than pine trees, or tomatoes other than tomatoes. We never see it. We can't even make it happen in the laboratory. Make your tomato turn into something non-tomato. Get all the scientists working on that. If a bunch of scientists could do it, that would only prove it takes intelligence to change the gene code. It certainly doesn't happen in nature. So I think I clearly won the debate tonight. I don't think you demonstrated that macro comes from micro. And I don't think the little variations you pointed out are any evidence that would hold up in a court of law that said we can therefore prove pine trees and whales are related from that. I think you really are dreaming on that one. Go ahead.
Okay, well, thank you for that concluding statement, Dr. Hovind. Good job to the both of you. We had a really big audience tonight. We'll do what we can in the Q&A period. I've got 1,000 super chats, 1,000 questions, so we'll do as many as we can for maybe roughly 15 minutes or so. What I like to do for the Q&A, whoever the question is for, typically there might be a response from the other person, but I always like to make sure that the person who the question was for gets the last word. So let's get right to it then. Thanks again, guys. I'm just gonna go through a few of these. Okay, so super chat from George Bond. Thanks so much, brother. He says, I'm putting SFT's kids through college. Yes, you are. Thanks so much. Let's see here. Super chat from Jungle Jargon. Thanks so much. This one is for Dr. Dan. He says, how can you get billions of bits of written programming that is not there? Dr. Dan, go ahead.
It's surprisingly easy, and we actually observed this happening. And I flashed the reference for something like this just a little while ago. It's you have random sequences, and that's not hard to get. And when within random sequences, you get biochemical functions, and you throw in duplications, you throw in mutations in the duplicated regions. It's actually not that hard. In fact, there's a couple instances of whole genome duplication in vertebrate evolutionary history. Creationists bring this up as a major stumbling block for evolutionary theory, but like the evidence from laboratory experiments, it's just not that complicated to get new genetic information. It's gene duplication, it's mutation, it's neofunctionalization. These are well-studied mechanisms.
Okay, I appreciate that response, Dr. Dan. Dr. Hovind, did you want a quick response, or?
I would say that's dreaming to say it's not that complicated. A single cell, I think any biologist who studies the cell would say, is more complicated than the space shuttle. To my knowledge, the most complex machine ever built by man. Within that single cell, there are all kinds of chromosomes. Some have even over 1,000 chromosomes in one cell. Some life forms do. This chromosome, the DNA, the information contained in there is greater than all the information and all the computers ever put together by man combined. It's just dreaming to say this could happen by chance. You're welcome to believe that. I don't think that's going to hold up in front of your judgment day one day, but you're going to say, well, I saw the evidence and believed that stuff. I think the creator is going to have a long talk with you about that, Dan. But especially since you're turning other people away from believing in him by teaching what you're teaching, I think that's even more serious. But no, I would say the complexity of the DNA code is impossible to explain by random mutations over billions of years, over trillions, quadrillions of years. Not going to happen. It's something you have to believe in.
Thank you, Kent. And since it was your question there, Dan, go ahead. Final word.
And that's just an irreducible complexity argument, saying that you have all these things that have formed over time. I mean, there's depending on how you go back to the original Michael Behe writings on that, he omits a bunch of evolutionary mechanisms, and then he changed it around, and it becomes kind of a wishy-washy idea that actually permits some irreducibly complex things to form, but not others. So that the idea of irreducible complexity just has no merit at this point. About 30 years after it was first proposed by Behe in Darwin's Black Box, he's changed the idea several times, and it just bears no resemblance to the original kind of hard form of the idea, and it's so wishy-washy now that you could drive a truck through it. It's just not a problem for evolutionary processes to do that kind of thing.
Okay, well, thank you there, Dan. So next question is from Steve in the chat. Thanks so much for your question. I'll just read it word for word. This question is for Dr. Dan. If we all evolved, then why isn't there very different forms of humanoid animals or people? Why are there monkeys and people, but nothing in between? Take your time.
That's a really fun question. The answer is because we're limited in terms of our ecological niche space. So what resources in the environment do you consume, and what space do you physically occupy? And so we have apes that live in tropical rainforests, and humans are the ape that started to live in semi-arid grasslands, basically. And that's a separate ecological niche. And there were actually lots of things that did that, lots of other hominid species that occupied that niche, but we are the Homo sapiens are the only one that is surviving today. But there are lots of other species that have previously occupied that niche. And for the ones that we overlapped with, like Neanderthals and Denisovans, the reason they don't currently occupy that niche is we interacted with them, we competed with them, and we drove them to extinction. So the reason that there are forest-dwelling apes, and then there's humans, which are the grassland-dwelling ape, but there's no, like right now, there's nothing, there's no Australopiths right now. It's because we occupy that niche, and we use those resources so nothing else can exploit them.
Okay, thanks for that response to a good question, Dr. Dan. Dr. Hovind, did you have a response to that?
Well, he certainly has a vivid imagination. He can believe that, and he can certainly believe, he says, humans are apes that live in the grasslands. Well, he would know his ancestors better than me, but mine are Norwegian. And I think humans have always been humans. I think man has deteriorated over the centuries, not improved. If you want to be an ape, you go for it, but I'm not. God created man in his own image.
SFT, we got to get rolling here because we have a bunch of super chats. So do you want me to go through them or?
Lightning round.
Actually, Prey, since you saved most of the super chats, which are just like quick three-word.
Yeah,
sentence.
A lot of these are, yeah.
Yeah, why don't you just do a quick lightning round, and then I'll go through a couple more questions that I saved. Go ahead.
I'll be as fast
All right,
as I can.
so this is from, okay, go ahead. Okay. Dan, you want to go ahead or?
No. I was saying I'll be fast.
Okay.
I'll be fast.
So this is Rodan the Monster for $4.99. Thank you for your super chat. He says evolution just wants to molest our children via indoctrination, while creation's touch is pure. This is a quote from Christoph Jones, PhD psychologist, University of Oslo. And this is another super chat from George Bond. Thank you, George. He's just doing all over the place super chats. I'm putting SF. Okay, we did that one. So this is Cocoa Puffer. Challenge accepted, and this is Redefine Living. Thank you, Cocoa Puffer, for $5 super chat. This is Redefine Living for $5. Okay, George. So they're having a conversation, and then George Bond for $5 says,
"Fun in the chat."
Yeah, well done, Cocoa Puffer. And this is Logical Plausible Probable for $5. Oh, George, this could get expensive. And this is Jungle Jargon for $5. How can he get billions of bits of written programming that is not there? We did that.
Yeah, we did that one. Praise.
Okay,
I think you're on the film free one.
No. I have George Bond. So George Bond for $5 says, "Good one, Tiffany." George Bond, another $5. Thanks, LPP. So here we go. Logical, Probable, Plausible for $5. He says, "Don't miss the after show. Open mic, share who you think won. Look for the link in the chat." So everyone go ahead and do that. Another $5 super chat from George Bond. Thank you, Jungle. Another $5 super chat from George Bond. 2 from LPP. Thanks, John. Here's Nephilim Freeze, $5 super chat. Thank you, Neff. Algae forming.
Looks like it's a question for Dan.
He says algae forming a colony does not constitute an organism because it has no intercellular systems. Evolutionists misrepresent science dishonestly.
No, that's not a colony. It's a multicellular organism because it does have intercellular systems. It has the extracellular matrix that's built cooperatively by all of those cells. Plus, not all of them reproduce, which is a hallmark of multicellularity.
Thank you for that. And here's George Bond for $5. Thanks, Neff. So here's Nephilim Free for $10. Question for Dan. A colony of algae does not have organs or intercellular systems and cannot be called an organism or multicellularity. Why do you dishonestly misrepresent it as one?
Just answered that. That's basically the same question as the last one. It's because it is multicellular. It adheres to the definition of multicellular. Yeah. I mean,
thank you.
I didn't write the definition. Take it up with the dictionary.
This one's from Cocoa Puffer for $5. Dan, you're wrong about multicellular algae. The algae use continuous environmental tracking, a hallmark of built-in engineered adaptability.
No, if that was the case, they would go back after you remove the predator, and they stay multicellular after you remove the predator. So that's not the case.
Did you want a quick response to that, Dr. Hovind?
Well, if you can't go back after you remove the predator, maybe it's because those that have lost the ability to reproduce and function as skin cells, as the illustration he gave, again, it was a loss of information. No individual cell is better than it was before. None.
So here's a $5 super chat from George Pond again. Wow, George, thank you so much for your help on the channel. Well done, Cocoa Puffer. And this is a $2.99 super chat from Ian Chen. Professor Dan is awesome. That's all. So you got a fan there.
You.
And here's some Faithful, Honest, and True $5. Thank you, Faithful. High altitude is epigenetic, and the Badua deep divers is epigenetic. Dan the pseudoscience man. So you can address that if you want.
Oh, thank you for identifying the deep divers. But the Tibetan one I have handy, it's not. It's a different allele in the EPAS1 gene. It's an alternate allele. It's not epigenetic.
And George Bond for 5. Good one, Jason. So we're done with the super chats. Now we have the questions. If you guys want to get to that, or are we done? Or
yeah, let's do. We could probably go for 5 hours. We'll do 2 more questions. I'll pick a couple good ones out here, and then we'll call it a night. It's been really big chat. It's been fun. Everyone in the chat's having fun. The debate itself's been good. So let's see
and
here.
Sorry for the delay, everybody. I appreciate you all sticking it out this long.
And Dr. Hovind, we appreciate the extra time you gave us to still have this debate. Okay, so science is observable. Question for Dan. What is one observable example of a beneficial mutation relevant to macroevolution?
Relevant to macroevolution? Well, I mean, I think a lot of things are relevant to macroevolution. Let's see. So the mutation that permits the cells to stick together in Chlamydomonas, that's certainly relevant for macroevolution. I think because macroevolution is defined as speciation or larger than the VPU mutations in HIV I talked about, because that is how you get one of the ways that one of the things that's required to get from SIV to HIV. I'll give you another example here, and I can either share we're trying to go fast, so I won't share the screen, but there was a recent paper from 2017 on plasmids in archaeal cells that are in the process of becoming viruses because they're gaining the ability to transmit extracellularly via vesicles. And the mutations associated with that are beneficial because those plasmids, they don't lose anything, but they gain a new way of propagating through the environment. So there's a few examples for you.
Unless you'd like a response to that, Kent, we can go to the last question.
No, it clearly shows his vivid imagination. Go ahead.
I mean, we watch it happen, but sure.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so let's see. Last question for Dan. What would falsify the theory of evolution in genetics? Go ahead.
Oh, that's a great question. The answer is there are a lot of things that would have falsified evolutionary theory, but evolution passed each of the tests. So, for example, if genotype and phenotype were not connected, if there was no mechanism of transmitting genetic information from generation to generation, evolution would have been falsified. If there's no mechanism of reliably copying genetic information, evolution would have been falsified. If there was no phenotypic variation within a population, evolution would have been falsified. There's lots of examples. If phenotypes stayed constant generation over generation, if genetics, if there were no mutations, if genotypes stayed constant generation over generation, that would falsify evolution. The problem for creationists is that none of that stuff happened. We tested all those things, and it turned out that evolution passed the test each time.
Okay, well, I want to thank the chat for lots of good questions. Sorry if we didn't get to all of them, but if we did, we'd be going for 5 hours. So we're going on a couple hours now. I want to thank both Dr. Dan and Dr. Hovind for giving us their time. Without you guys giving us your time, we wouldn't be able to have a debate tonight. So I'm going to give it to you guys for a few final words if you wanted to like plug your channels or something. Yeah, let's end it that way. Dan, go ahead.
So first, again, my name's Dr. Dan Stern Cardinale. My channel is Creation Myths, and I think the tagline is something about gleefully debunking creationist nonsense, which is a pretty good definition of what I try to do there. So you could find a whole bunch of stuff there. I kind of group things into creation myths and talk about why specific claims are false, and I do it kind of like I did right here, with like specific observed examples that just refute the creationist claims. The last thing I want to do is I really want to thank Kent for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time, and especially with the delay with the storm by me, staying so late. But I also do want to say to creationists watching that I really personally appreciate Kent Hovind as an opponent in this debate and as kind of the spokesman for creationism writ large. because of kind of what we saw tonight, outdated arguments and, not really engaging with the issue at hand. And I really do think, and I know I beat this drum a lot when I talk to and with and about creationists, is that pick better arguments that do a better job representing the case you are trying to make. But by all means, as far as I'm concerned, keep having Kent Hovind as your spokesperson, because as an evolutionary biologist, it makes it easier for me. So thank you.
Okay, go ahead there, Kent.
All right. Well, thank you, sir. Thank you for coming, Dan. Appreciate that. The title was, does microevolution lead to macroevolution? I think we could say no. I don't see it happen, but that's a different story. My website, drdino.com, I speak a lot on the topic of dinosaurs. The Bible says God made everything in 6 days. Everything. Stars, dinosaurs, everything, all lived at the same time. Well, stars don't live, but as I started off, those last days, there are scoffers who walk after their own lusts, and the Bible says they're willingly ignorant of the creation. God created the animals and plants to always bring forth after their kind. Algae still produce algae. Cows still produce cows. Dogs still produce dogs. Every farmer on the planet will tell you that. How you can believe otherwise, I don't know, but you're welcome to believe that, but it's not science. What we observe is everything brings forth after its kind. There was a worldwide flood that created the fossils and the canyons and the strata of the earth. I covered that in my seminar series, how all the different layers of the earth are the same age. If you shuffle a deck of cards, is the top card younger? No. They tell the kids the top layer is younger than the bottom layer. Well, where'd they come from? Outer space? No, they're all the same. They got shuffled up in a big flood. But the scoffers are ignorant of that creation and the flood and the coming judgment. I think Pascal's wager fits in good here. Dan, if you're right, I haven't lost a thing. I have enjoyed life. If I'm right, you're in serious trouble when you stand before God. I want to think about that. Okay, thank you for having us.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for a really good debate. Definitely one to remember. Real quick, Logical, Plausible, Probable is having an after show. Open mic. Anybody can join. I'm sure it's going to be a good time. So once again, thanks so much, guys. Have a good night. I'll shoot it off to the producer.